Greetings, Chuck here, and I'd like to talk to you today a little bit about this wooden project I recently completed, sitting on the table here beside me. Woodworking has been a passion of mine since I was a little boy. Besides the techniques and the skills that I learned in my industrial arts classes in high school and in college, I've been lucky enough to have been able to work side by side with some very talented woodworkers. I have designed and built a lot of traditional wood projects, things like cabinets and furniture, but now as I find myself transitioning into my retirement life and have more time to spend in my shop, I really wanted to dive into something more interesting, more complex, more unique. As a motorcycle enthusiast for over 50 years, I've always had a keen interest in two wheels. So that got me to thinking that maybe that's the arena I want to jump into. Maybe I'll start this process by building some wooden bicycles. I started with a full-scale mountain bike, and I wanted to have it so that I could hang it on a wall. It's fairly easily done because a bicycle, for the most part, looks the same on both sides. So I was really just concentrating on which way I wanted that bike to face. And I have this bike hanging on a wall in my home right now. The next bike I decided to build was a replica of an antique big wheel bike. My best friend owned one of these, and he used to ride it in parades, and I thought that was the coolest damn thing I'd ever seen. And unfortunately, I lost my friend about 6 years ago. So I reached out to his wife and asked if I could borrow that bike so I could duplicate it. And of course she said yes. After I completed that, I took that bike up to her home in Wyoming and mounted it on a wall for her. It's a happy reminder of my best friend and of her husband. Both of these bicycles had unique complexities in their construction, but they gave me the confidence I needed to move on to a more difficult project, a project that I really was wanting to build all along, and that's a wooden motorcycle. As I'd said before, the bicycles I made full scale, and I mounted them on a wall. That felt too large for a motorcycle, so I scaled this one back to 80% of full size. Also different from the bicycles is that the motorcycle has unique characteristics on both sides. Interesting detail that I wanted to duplicate. So I learned early on that I was not going to make this as a wall hanging. This was going to be something that was going to stand on its own. As I was searching for bikes, I was primarily looking in the antique market, and primarily because I needed something that was simple enough that I could pull this off, but still had classic styling and an interesting history. That's why I chose this bike. This is a 1911 Harley Davidson Model 7D. It's a replica of the first successful production of the iconic V-twin that still defines the modern Harley Davidson. I started this project by building the front and rear wheel. I felt that they were going to probably be the most difficult thing on the bike. I built them with individual components just like the real bike would have: hub, spokes, rim, and tire. The hub and spokes are made out of maple with a slight gray wash to duplicate metal. The rim consists of 5 layers of 1/8-inch thick wood called wenge. It's an African wood that I bent and glued around some forms that I made. After that was completed, I mounted that rim to the spokes and the hub and trued them up on my sanding wheel. Next came the tire. The tire is made of American basswood. It's a softer wood, white by its very nature, as these tires on this bike were white. They consist of 13 layers of 1/8-inch thick basswood that I glued over the rim. The tire is also ballooned out around the rim. It's wider than the rim is itself, as the original tire would have been. Once I completed that and trued it up one last time, I cut and filed in all the tread on that tire. Each wheel took approximately a month. After I had completed them, I knew that everything else in this bike that had to be bent or shaped was possible. Next came the frame and the forks. Both of these products are made out of wenge. The frame is made out of 8 layers of 1/8-inch thick wenge that I bent and glued. Same process that I used for building the wheels and the tires. The forks are made out of solid stock. Once I had all these cut out and finished, I mounted them to each other and then mounted the 2 wheels, the front and rear wheel. And now I had a rolling chassis sitting on my workbench. From here I moved on to the body parts, the 2 fenders, the 2 tanks. The fenders and tanks are made from another African wood called padauk. It has a beautiful natural red finish that I felt gave it the added dimension that I was looking for. The fenders are 5 layers thick, 1/8-inch padauk, bent again in the same way I had done the tires and wheels. After I had mounted them to the bike, I'm really getting down the road a long ways. This is starting to look like a complete bike. I have an open cavity for where the motor goes, and so I built, instead of building the motor in that cavity and risking damage to this bike, I built a template off to the side of the same dimensions so I could build a motor that fit in there and then move it to the bike once I was complete. The handlebars are made out of conduit. I bent those out of conduit instead of building them out of wood like the rest of the bike had been. Just felt that the wood was going to be too flimsy. So I have handlebars out of conduit, hand grips out of walnut, and the seat is also carved out of several layers of walnut. The final step was to build the motor. I made this motor out of maple with a slight gray wash as I had done the hubs and the spokes to duplicate metal. The 2 cylinders I had originally thought I was going to turn on a lathe, but I just didn't feel like I could get the necessary depth in between the fins that I wanted to get. So I made them out of individual parts. Fins are maple and the spacers in between are wenge. The original bike, like a lot of bikes of that era, had exposed rocker arms and push rods. My bike has the same thing. I made the 2 spark plugs out of bass and wenge. Antique spark plugs were generally 2 pieces, and I happened to have one, so I used it as a pattern to make these 2 spark plugs on this motor. I purposely left off all the cabling and all the controls to minimize the visual interference that they brought. This project took me over 14 months to complete, counting the necessary breaks to regain my passion, but I feel it encompasses the original spirit of a very special bike fairly well. I have never been able to make 2 of anything. I think it's because I expend all my energy building the first product and am unable to match that with the second. Therefore, this bike is truly one of a kind. I will not be making another model like this. I may very well build another motorcycle, but time will tell. I hope you have enjoyed this journey with me. It's truly been a ride of a lifetime. Adios.